Welcome, everybody, in. It's another episode of the Nice Job Podcast. How are you doing out there? Are you doing good? Are you doing great? If you're not doing so good, guess what? We're going to turn it around right here with this episode. We are so thankful that you are here, taking time out of your day to hopefully become a better business owner, a better person. And we would love for you to share, comment, ask questions here if you're watching live. We love that sort of interaction. But if you're a little shy or you're just not feeling it right now, at the very least, just take something that you get from this conversation, a little nugget that you write down, and try it out. Implement it in your business and see if it works. We think it will. We think it'll help you out. And if it doesn't, that's another data set for you to make better decisions going forward. So enjoy, kick on back, listen in, and hopefully we'll have something really great for you to take and add into your business. This episode in particular, I think is going to be one of our more interesting episodes because there's a lot of different avenues I could go with talking with this guest. And I've heard him, he has a podcast of his own and things like that. And, he's got a lot of energy. And for those that listen to this show know that I am just holding my energy back, waiting for it to explode. So I have a feeling that it's really going to come out in this episode. It is Jarrett Correia, CEO of Red Cave Law Firm Consulting. Jarrett, thank you so much for joining us here on the Nice Job Podcast.
Thanks, man. Lots of pressure. I got to bring the energy. We're giving people a better life. All right, I'm ready for it. Let's do it.
Yeah, I figured I set the bar as high as I possibly can, and then as the host, dump all that responsibility on fulfilling it to you.
All right, I'm ready. I'm ready. I stretched before we did this, so I'm feeling good.
So, as I mentioned, CEO of Red Cave Law Firm Consulting. Yeah. Some of us, or some of our listeners, might raise an eyebrow as we do a lot of home service professionals and things like that. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of topics that cross over both genres. Before we get into that, love to learn a little bit more about you. How did you? I'm going to keep it very high level and take it wherever you want. Like, how did you get into your field and your career? What drove you that direction, or if you fell into it, what was the thing that kept you there?
My origin story. I'm ready.
Right.
So I was in college and I was on the debate team in college. We were really good. We went all around the country. And I think we lost the national championship by 1 point when I was a senior. And so I was a senior in college and I'm like, all right, what do I do now? I had no clue what I wanted to do. Like I was 22 years old. And I'm like, oh, I'll go to law school. That sounds like a great idea. So you're in law school and you're like, oh, actually, this is really expensive and law is really boring. So I went to the career development office at my law school and I was like, I think I'd really like to do consulting for law firms. And they were like, that's a stupid idea. You should get a real job. So I went out, got a real job at a law firm for a few years, but then I still had this itch to do the consulting thing. And state of Massachusetts, where I'm from, the state Supreme Court launched a consulting service for lawyers. 60,000 lawyers in Massachusetts. I'm like, oh, that's perfect. I can get a ton of reps working with people. So I was the first hire for that organization. I worked there for about 8 years. And then for the last 6 or 7 years, I've been running my own consulting company. I kind of built a national reputation there working with lawyers, and I was capped in only working with Massachusetts attorneys. I was capped with a salary. So I've set up this subscription-based consulting service where I work with lawyers directly, or I work with bar associations as their exclusive provider of consulting services. And in the last 15 years, I've probably worked with 4,000 law firms about running better businesses, probably every continent except for Antarctica. So it's been fun. I like the business side of it much better than the law practice side of it.
And that's it's interesting because I don't know if there's a large majority out there that really kind of, I don't say understands, but the first thing that pops in their head when they think of a lawyer or a law firm is kind of the business side of it. There's a lot of lawyers that will kind of brand themselves or sell themselves, for doing what they do of championing rights, victories and things like that. But, ultimately, if it was something that wasn't turning any sort of a profit or something that you couldn't really make a living off of, you wonder how many would actually sign up and the commitment, because it's a lot of long hours, sleepless nights and things like that to take on a whole lot of it. And it's also what I find interesting, kind of going into a little bit more of the broader topic we're talking about, is you also are dealing with a good amount of sensitive material from time to time.
Right.
And a lot of times what that could end up being or end up manifesting as is a little bit of old school ways and perhaps not an embracing of some technologies because there's just that kind of fear of
Right.
security. Am I off in that assessment, or is that something that you've kind of seen sometimes, that there's a couple of law practices or things like that that are kind of fearful of technology just purely from the, well, what if someone sees something on my cloud? Do you
Oh,
get
my
that
friend,
feeling at all?
I have stories, many, many stories. And it's not just law practices, like a lot of other businesses that have to deal with sensitive information. And there's a number of verticals that do. But yeah, I've had lawyers who say, who want to use paper and files and old school systems because they feel like it's safer. And in many ways, it's not. But you get the lawyer who says, well, I don't want to put my stuff on the cloud because then other people can access it. They don't realize that there are systems that you can build into something like that. There are security protocols you can add that make it a lot easier to run something like that. And it's actually more secure if you do it correctly. I've had lawyers who have said, well, I don't like the cloud, but what if I fax some stuff? Like nobody uses fax anymore. I'm sure nobody's going to hack a fax. And I can sit there and be like, well, that's hard to argue against, frankly, but it's going to be super inefficient. So I think for a lot of these industries and lawyers in particular, there's a lot of push and pull between what's convenient and what's secure, not just for the law firms, but for the clients as well. Because lawyers and some other professionals also, they have this duty of managing their clients' data at a higher level than like a standard business would. There are ethics rules, there are state laws they have to adhere to. It's just an interesting collection of responsibilities. And that's one of the reasons why I went into consulting exclusively with law firms, because not many people understand that. Not many people who are lawyers understand that effectively. But yeah, a lot of lawyers turn into Luddites because they're worried about security of the cloud, without a doubt.
And sometimes we see a little bit of that in the trades as well.
Mhm.
I think just because the skill itself kind of harkens back to,
Right.
that the
Right.
hands-on. It's a very familiar sort of thing to, there's some that still, even when it comes to, tools that help automate, don't use an electric something as opposed to manual because it's more tactile, it's more touch, it's more feel. And ultimately,
Oh
I
yeah.
think would be the same for lawyers. It kind of comes down with the, the trades and, home service professionals and skilled labor in that regard, is
Well, this is
ultimately
like
you're going
every
to kind of,
American folktale that you've ever described, right? It's like the John Henry
yeah,
myth, which is like you got to beat the machine. You're not out there
yeah.
being the machine. Nobody wants to be the machine. Everybody wants to beat the machine. And that's true of lawyers too, for sure.
And but what it comes down to is that it becomes a, where are you losing efficiency and what
Yes.
is that costing you in the long run? Because even
Yeah.
just the basic, the thing that clicks in my head is just thinking about manually highlighting. It's the old TV trope, and I know it still happens a ton in a lot of professions, but they're surrounded by everything and they're highlighting away. But just being able to do that a little find digitally, the little
Oh, right.
control there, and
Right.
finding out how is really efficient. If Is there a way that you've been able to determine, through your consulting, things like that, of a great place to really explain that visualization of, hey, like this is the efficiency you're losing by not embracing technology?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I think the highlighting thing. So I think what's interesting is you're talking about tradespeople, right?
Mhm.
And maybe tradespeople are like building furniture or something. They're working with their hands, they're using physical tools. But lawyers don't do exactly the same thing, but lawyers embrace paper. So
Yeah.
they like to flip through paper. They like to have documents that they can touch. Very similar ethos that they have. So to convince lawyers to use technology, and I think a lot of these tactics work in other industries as well. It's like I'll take a very specific example and talk to them about like magnitudes of time saving. So simple example, estate planning attorney, somebody who drafts somebody's will, right? Client comes in, you draft a will, you do it from a template, you're finding and replacing, you're cutting and pasting. That may take you 4 hours. So you get document assembly software, which is going to pull in a lot of that data from other systems. It's going to make sure that the right clauses are in place. Maybe that takes you an hour. So what I tell attorneys is like, okay, you've now reduced the time it takes you to draft a will from 4 hours to 1 hour. So the next thing you're going to do is call your client and tell them, hey, I got great news. I'm discounting my services by 75%, right? No,
Yeah.
you're not going to do that. You're going to charge the same amount of money and make 4 times as much. So utilizing examples like that, I find a lot of attorneys say, oh, okay, My number one concern is making revenue. I want to make more revenue. Now I can make 4 times as much. That's great. And there's a number of other examples like that that I utilize with firms, but that's probably the most brutal, where I can say do 4 times as much work, make 4 times as much money. And I think that applies to other trades as well in certain contexts.
Yeah, I mean, the more efficient that you're going to be in maximizing your time allows you to do more. And then there's also the converse of it, which I'm interested to see how much it speaks in the law as opposed to the trades, whatever, is the client side of it, right? So if you have something like, oh, hey, I want to learn, either about your problem or about, the issue that you need me to address. Here's 17 pieces of paper I would like for you to fill out. And the reason it's 17 pieces of paper is I don't know exactly where we're going to go on pages 1 through 3, but they'll direct you to page 7 and kind of go back. From the customer journey, the client journey, can you express a little bit about how these small little, advancements in technology are going to also put you light years ahead when it comes to people's experience with you? Because a lot of people are changing and they want more contact points and they don't want it to be this big long thing they got to sift through themselves.
Well, this is a really interesting thing for lawyers. So most lawyers hate to talk to their clients. And the reason that's the case is because they think their clients hate them. And sometimes that's the case because traditionally, like if you're being contacted by a lawyer and you're a legal consumer or a client of that firm, the lawyer wants 2 things from you. They want you to get them something like a document that you don't want to get that's going to be hard to retrieve, or they want money. And those are the only times that lawyers contact their clients. So the notion of like nurture, the notion of client journeys, like a lot of lawyers don't operate on that front at all. So what's great about that, if you can operate in those categories as an attorney, is that not only do you become more efficient, but you also convert more leads. So we're back to the revenue question. So believe it or not, like some of the statistics in legal are staggering. So 64% of the time when someone leaves a voicemail for a law firm, it's not returned. So you might as well just be lighting money on fire at that point. It takes an average of 8 emails to schedule an appointment with a lawyer. And when I talk to attorneys, I'm like, and other tradespeople as well, like compare that to the experience when I want to buy Disney Plus. I know immediately what the value is. I know it's inexpensive. I click a button and I get the entire content library that was dreamed up by Walt Disney from like now through eternity. When I'm talking to a lawyer, and this is true of other tradespeople, I may not know what they do. So I need some education. I need to figure out what the next step is. Like if a layperson said, if I asked a layperson, like, what are the first 3 things that happen when you hire a lawyer? They're going to say, I have no idea. I have no clue. So for lawyers in particular, and probably other tradespeople who work in complex industries, there's that education component, which can take place on the intake side. You can push that through a client journey. And then it's about responsiveness and being able to answer people's questions, which a lot of lawyers are bad at, frankly. Most lawyers, I would tell you, most law firms, I would say more than 50% of law firms don't have any intake journey, client journey to speak of, period.
Yeah. And when you talk about that intake process, I think if you don't have anything to really get as much information as you can as the connection goes, that you probably end up in a lot of situations where you're kind of wasting your time because you're not the right fit.
Right. Yeah.
How important is it to have just a filtering system just in regard? Like there's so much deeper we go into that, but I think that on its own is like, all right, at the very least, when you start actually spending time that your time is valuable because you've done this filtering and prior, but customers aren't turned off by that, are they? I mean, is this kind of accepted practice now?
At least as far as legal consumers, no. I mean, a lot of lawyers go on a lot of fishing expeditions, but it's not the client's fault. It's the lawyer's fault. They're not defining their services enough. They're not providing enough information through content marketing. They're not providing people next steps. So in legal, statistically, studies have shown this, that like if you engage a lead effectively on your website, 90% of the time, they're not going to contact another lawyer before they talk to you. Now, that doesn't guarantee that you're going to get the lead, but it gives you the first bite at the apple. So that gives you a lot of opportunity as a law firm if you can get somebody engaged to like book an appointment or read something you've written, to provide follow-up information, to get people through that pipeline, to classify them, to learn more about what their needs are. I mean, for lawyers, they have ethical responsibilities in some cases to only work with clients that live in certain states. So at a very baseline level, you want to find out, can I even service this person with my license? And a lot of lawyers don't even go through that level of classification. But if you can add like 3, 4 different classifications onto communications with a lead, you're going to have a much better idea of who you're talking to. You're going to be able to reject people maybe without even talking to them. And you're going to have more time to do the work that you need to do to be efficient. And what's really interesting is on the back end of that, if you do this correctly, you get the right clients in. Law firms that are efficient make more money. So there's a company called Clio that does law practice management software. They just came out with a study that said the average utilization rate in legal is 29%. So roughly 2.5 of every 8 hours get billed to a client, not collected, billed. And for law firms that are 5% higher than that, they make double the amount of money every 5 years. For law firms that are 5% below that, they make half as much money every 5 years. But I think what a lot of law firms don't realize is that it starts on the intake level. You need to be more efficient with intake so you're working with the right clients. You need to be as efficient as possible as a law firm. That's how you make money. And like, that's not a secret. That's true of probably every business. But statistically, that's really backed up heavily in legal.
And it's funny you mentioned Clio, because NiceJob and Clio actually just developed an integration. So,
I have
if
heard,
you're using
yes.
Clio, you're able to use NiceJob in that sense. And for us, when you talk about, coming from intake and all the way through and making sure you have the right client, regardless of industry, is we find, coming from the reputation marketing side of it, is that leads to better reviews, because more often than not, bad reviews are not actually structured around a bad job. It's about failure to meet expectations.
Right.
Totally. So I mean, if you're really, you're cutting corners, you're really bad, and it's horrible customer experience, like, yes, that'll generate a bad review. But a lot of times those 3 stars, those mid-road ones, it comes because expectations were not either addressed or stated. And sometimes it's not, like I said, the fault of the work. It comes down to, they were expecting more because they weren't filtered out prior. But the follow-up, those reviews, that kind of social feedback, that kind of builds in the reputation. And when we talk about efficiency, being able to establish yourself as trustworthy, and a reputable solution to a problem, has to also help with even an initial filter before they might talk to a chatbot or things like that. Now you're kind of showing up and people have an idea of who you are.
Right. Like the notion of education for a lawyer and for other people involved in complex businesses, I think is really important. So you want to give people some sense of what it is that you do. So I referenced Clio before. Their last legal trends report is very interesting on a lot of levels. One of which is what the clients actually look for from lawyers. So lawyers are really good about putting information on their website, which is like, hey, I went to this law school. I went to this college. I wrote for this law review. Lay people don't know anything about that, right? Like I wrote for, so if a lawyer says, I wrote for the Transnational Law Review at Syracuse University, if I'm somebody sitting at home, I'm like, what the hell is that? I have no clue.
Yeah.
So what they're looking for is, can you solve my problem? So they want to know whether you have a niche expertise of some kind. And then they want to understand the legal process. And I tell lawyers all the time, like, they don't want to give out information about the legal process because they've been told for years that like your work speaks for yourself. You do good work, you get good clients. It's not necessarily the way it works, right? And they've also been told, just give people a taste, you don't want to give them too much information because then they won't hire you. But I use the example of say my toilet's clogged and I have a plumber come to my house and he's sitting in my bathroom and he's like, it's going to take these 19 steps to unclog this toilet. It's going to be disgusting. I'm not going to be like, oh, okay. Now that you've told me that, I'm going to go do that myself. I'm going to be like, please, I want you to unclog my toilet even more now. And for lawyers, it's the same thing. Like the more complex you make it, people are not going to be like, oh, yeah, I'm going to go to law school, come back 4 years from now, prosecute this case, and then I'll let you know how it went. It's just not going to happen. So yeah, for laying that groundwork is essential. And setting expectations is also important. So the other thing you mentioned that I think is really interesting is like consumers also don't have a great idea about expectations they should have about their lawyers. And with legal and other industries, like it's not necessarily about the result for some people, it's about the process. Like when I was in practice, I had a lot of clients that had negative results working with me, but they were happy because of how we dealt with the process. And they understand that like if they like you and you did a good job, like you're not going to win every case. So there's never a point at which you can't rescue a client and get a good review out of them, to my mind. But setting those expectations up ahead of time is important. I know a lawyer does a great job gathering reviews, and one of the things he does is when clients come in, he says, what do you think about lawyers? Like, what were your negative perceptions of potentially working with me? And if a client says, I thought it was going to be really expensive, he caches that information somewhere. And when the case is over, he'll say, when we started working together, you said you thought it would be really expensive. Did that actually happen? And so when a new client is looking at that information, they say, okay, like Jane Doe is here. She thought it was going to be really expensive to work with this attorney. It wasn't. Maybe I'm going to feel the same way. So I think there's a lot of groundwork you can lay here in terms of setting up expectations just online when people are reaching out to you, but also when you have that first conversation with a client. So I think those are all excellent points that you make.
And with that last story, it
Yeah.
also goes as now you probably know the biggest pain point or the biggest concern. So, in that sort of
Right.
scenario, like, yeah, you know what? Like I might be a little bit more off put about the money I'm spending if perhaps whenever I approach you, it looks like the fanciest place in the world. Cause now I feel like I'm just funding your Perrier and not actually, what's happening
Right.
here. So, maybe
Right.
it's a good opportunity, visuals or everything. Like make sure you roll up the sleeve a bit before the meeting or something like that. But a
Put
lot
the
of our audience
Perrier
is
away.
yeah, but a lot of our services, are home service professionals, and for some of them, a lot of what they talk about is communication of why things are happening.
Right.
And that's the same sort of thing. Is sometimes when you're in these complex sort of fields, is your knowledge kind of advanced, but maybe the terminology or kind of what you're talking about is going over the head. That it doesn't come off as expertise; it just comes off as them feeling more removed and them not kind of feeling a part of the process. And when you talk about the review on the back end, I think that also goes to show that if you're able to share people's experiences, people then identify with the people that have the experience more so than the process. So for example, you talk about
Right.
the plumber thing, like, all right, maybe I am feeling confident myself. Maybe I can go and fix that toilet. But then I find out that the guy who wrote the review has the same type of toilet I did. In his review, he's like, thank goodness I didn't try this
Right.
myself.
Right.
That's instant. So someone, in the law firm is saying like, hey, I had a complicated case with, this and this sort of involved. People aren't kind of spoiling the whole thing, but talking about the fact of like, my biggest concern was X and they did Y, and that's why it's 5 stars. That's going to impart so much trust right off the top. So, I love the preparing. So the story told, it prepares the client
Right.
to know what they're going to say in their review. Is there anything else that you think is kind of something that's almost often overlooked that plays into, like I said, that efficiency of making sure it's always at the right place, right time, like prepping the customer to be able to leave a review or the client to leave a review at the end, I think is a very key thing. But is there anything beyond follow-up or, maybe additional touch points or anything like that you think that there's still this inefficiency there that really should be streamlined?
I mean, everything should be streamlined, in my opinion. Right. So, like, and the problem with lawyers, and I think a lot of other professionals as well, is like they have this notion in their head that they got to be high touch businesses. And to an extent, that's true. But the question is, how do you get to the high touch, and what do you want those high touch areas to be? So, law firm example, right? If I'm a lawyer and I want to convert a client, the absolute best thing I can do is to get on a call or a video conference with them as an initial consultation. So I can work through all the issues that they have. I can kind of find the right pricing package for them and get them locked into my firm. Anything before that and after that should be automated. And I think lawyers feel like, okay, if somebody calls me, I want to pick up the phone and sell them. But people want speed, they want engagement online, and they don't necessarily want to talk to you. So if my mom calls me, sorry, mom, I'm probably not going to pick up. But if she texts me, I'll respond right away. And I think a lot of consumers work like that as well. So if you're a law firm and you say, okay, I can get somebody into my website, I can engage them via whatever technology that is, chat, scheduling tool, whatever, get them into a pipeline, start to produce some client journey emails to them, right? So I can say, hey, welcome to the firm. Here's some information about what we do. The next thing you're going to do is sign a disclaimer so we can meet together, like sign that right here, make a payment here. Then the meeting is where it's high touch. And then after that, you put them into another follow-up automation cycle so they can sign an engagement agreement, get the retainer paid. That's how you want to do it. So I think lawyers misplace this notion of high touch, and they think I got to be high touch at every aspect of the transaction. But you want to be high touch at the right point of the transaction. And I think that's true for a lot of service professionals as well. So yeah, automation for me, automate absolutely as much as you can. Get to the point where you have one useful conversation with a lead and then convert them and put them back into a follow-up automation.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, you always have the opportunity, not honestly, like, to break out of the automation, but if something comes down the line
Yeah.
where you need another contact point, like, it's there. But now it also, you're not extending yourself to have to be available 24/7. Because with some
Right.
of these automations, they'll be
Right.
able to run, at the speed they need, and it always still feels like a personal touch. It's the one thing I always kind of shake my head at. People talk about, like, well,
Hmm.
not on the automation, because I think people like the personal touch, but there's
It's
systems that
pretty
you can design in
personal.
place
Yeah.
to make that. Yeah, I don't know. I think people, I don't know if I think that might have changed over the last year. People were a little bit more comfortable with
Yeah.
technology, but I find it funny with things like chatbots, things like that. People go like, yeah, well, when people think they're talking to a computer, they don't engage. But
Hmm.
I would disagree with that. If I feel like I'm not wasting my time, and then when
Me
I
too.
know it matters, like, look, if you're sending the robot to come paint my house, all right, maybe I'm a little concerned at that point. But I talking to someone on a phone or going through the text thing, I'm less likely to bounce around. I say to people is that if they're on your website and they're going to start some sort of journey, that means they're not looking at other websites. They're not looking at other
Exactly.
things. So if
Exactly.
they're
Yeah.
exploring you, then that's already circling your funnel, and then getting it to drop straight down at some point. Skill and gravity take over, I guess.
Right, man. And I would not call myself a millennial by any stretch of the imagination, although I think I'm right on that cutoff. But I prefer online communications at the
Yeah.
until the point at which I feel like I have to have a conversation with someone. I only need one conversation to hire a service provider. And I think a lot of people feel like more is needed than that, but I don't feel like that's the case any longer at all. And you make a great point where you say, you don't set up automation so that if somebody's like, hey, I'd like to talk to a real person, you're like, screw you, you're in the automation now. You can
Yeah.
still pick up the phone and contact somebody. Like, that's okay.
Yeah, but now but 9 out of 10 times though, before they get to, hey, I need a call, there's probably something you could answer.
Right.
Like, oh, hey, like, what forms of payment do you accept? That's
Exactly.
something that
Yeah.
probably a quick thing. It's not something you have to call, hop on a call and answer that. But
Yeah. You don't need
you
to be
know,
like, hey, here are my 5 payment forms and take half an hour out of your day for sure. Don't, if you're doing that, stop doing that.
yeah, right. But it's very interesting, as kind of society evolves and technology gets more and more advanced, that there's still that segment out there that might push against it. But ultimately, I think if you don't feel you understand technology, you at the very least probably understand efficiency. And a lot of things that you
Yes.
laid out during this conversation talk about, well, look, at the very least, just think of it like this. Maybe you don't know how that's working, that automation's working. Maybe it makes no sense to you. But does it make sense to you that you didn't waste time doing this, but instead were able to focus on doing that? And I think if that's
Right.
your takeaway, that should help open some doors for you.
Yeah, I think that's great. And one of the things I tell attorneys all the time is like, I think a lot of attorneys and probably a lot of business professionals in general have this notion that like the pandemic has changed everything. It was unforeseen and sudden. But to my mind, like the convenience economy was here already. It's only been accelerated by the fact of the pandemic. So this was an adjustment you were going to have to make down the line anyway. You're making it a little bit sooner, but that gives you an opportunity to embrace it quicker, advance, and be more innovative than a lot of the businesses out there that are saying, I'm just going to wait for things to go back to normal because it's not going back to normal. And from a health perspective, it will. But from the idea of how consumers want to engage with businesses, this is the way it's going to be.
Yeah, the handshake will return, but I don't know if people are flipping through a yellow page and dialing a number still. I think they're
Right.
going online trying to connect.
I may never touch another pen.
Yeah, that's very true. Very true. So here in season 2, I've been ending all of our conversations with one question in general. And so if it's your first time listening, I'll kind of set it up for you there. We bring our guest on because they're experts and they study and they learn and they develop opinions and they consult and they do all these great things. They're an expert. But the one thing I like to kind of make clear is even experts, there's something they're looking forward ahead. So I ask you, Jared, what is the one thing you don't know now that you're either actively working on or eager to find the answer to?
Oh, that's a really great question. Um, Aside from the stuff we talked about today,
Mhm.
I'm a huge believer in data analytics.
Okay.
So, law firms and many businesses run on gut reactions, ad hoc reactions. they're putting out fires all the time. So I am personally always looking to learn more about data analytics, machine learning, AI. We talked about the convenience economy as something that's ramping up right now. I think the next step beyond that is, and it makes sense, is if you've got these automations that can run, let's try to put as many of those into place as possible. Let's try to make them as intelligent as possible. And at least in the legal industry, that's a pretty nascent aspect of technology right now. So that's something that I've been interested in for a long time, that I continue to be interested in, and I continue to try to learn more and more about.
Awesome. Well, we wish you the best of luck in that pursuit and in all your other ventures as well. If someone's listening to the podcast and you know what, they just want to hear more of your voice, the dulcet tones there. Where can people either get in touch with you, find more about you? If someone was interested in Jarrett Correia, where should we direct them towards?
Oh, so many places. Well, I would go to my consulting website, which is redcavelegal.com. And then I have a podcast called the Legal Toolkit Podcast on the Legal Talk Network, which is actually a podcast network just for attorneys. We've recently rebooted it to model it after a late night talk show, and we don't only talk about law. So check it out.
Okay. I'm very intrigued.
You're intrigued, right? Yes.
Yes. Anything that can be developed like a late night talk show. I've been asking NiceJob for a while now. Pretty much the day I got here is that I would like a band to my left and some sort of desk to my right. That's just the setup I need for my workflow here. So after a good line, I can send it to the band and then walk on over to the desk.
Took me a while to get the band, but.
Awesome, Jarrett. Well, we appreciate it. We will drop, if you're watching on the replay or anything like that, we'll have those links, and contact points in the description below. And if you're listening on audio only, it's in the show notes at that point as well. Well, Jarrett, wish you, a good rest of your evening. And thanks again for joining us on the NiceJob Podcast.
Thank you. This was awesome. You guys are great. I appreciate it.
And we appreciate you as well. For all you out there that have tuned in, especially if it's your first time, thank you so much for listening to the conversation, engaging, and really just taking some time out of your day to try and make yourself a better business owner and a better person at that. We are rolling right along in season 2. We are getting towards the final couple episodes here. I think we're like under the 10. I think we're in the single digits of episode here in season 2. And every guest, I'm excited about, and we cannot wait to bring them to you. Until then, go ahead and have yourself a good one. And remember, be healthy, be safe, and don't forget to have a little fun out there as well. Take care, everybody.